Hey everybody, it's Jim here and welcome to the first episode of Project Paisley. We're going to be taking a look at this early reissue Fender Japan Stratocaster, checking out what parts come stock on it, going a little bit of an overview, checking out how it sounds as is, seeing if there are any problems that actually need to be addressed, and then potentially some things that I feel might want to be upgraded going onwards with this little mini series. But first, I'd like to talk a little bit about the history of the Paisley and Blue Flower models from Fender. In 1967, the summer of love, CBS was in control of Fender. Leo Fender himself had sold the company a few years prior to that. And, like corporations do, they wanted to try and cash in on all those flower children. Didn't work out that well with the sales, but they released the red Paisley, yes, that's what it was officially called, and the blue flower Telecaster, as well as bass versions of the Telecaster that had both of those finishes on it. Now, there are stories that there was one pink Paisley Stratocaster that was made as kind of a one-off. I've never seen it, but I believe it. When it comes to Fender back in those days, it wouldn't shock me if there was just one example of it. The guitar really didn't do that well. Fender, though, did happen to get in the hands of a very good player who begrudgingly did play it on stage thanks to a certain singer you might know. James Burton was given one of the pink Paisley Telecasters by Fender and said, "This is a perfect fit for you. Why don't you play it?" He was a little hesitant at first, but got a little nudge from a guy named Elvis. Yeah. And I don't play that for quite some time and became the guy that was associated with the pink Paisley Telecaster. However, after 2 years of production, that was all she wrote for Fender making these guitars in America in the 60s, and they didn't make them in the 70s either. We have to go all the way into the 1980s. The earliest ones you're going to find are actually Telecasters. Some are actually JVs, yes. Japan Vintage, the most sought after of all the Fender Japan models. Few and far in between. There happens to be one for sale in Germany at the time of filming this that I do look at from time to time, but they do exist. Outside of that, you do have A serials and E serials in both the blue flower and in the pink Paisley finish. However, Fender Japan were the first to actually mass produce the Strats in both of these finishes as well. Now, the flagship model of the Stratocaster version was an ST72-125, meaning 125,000 yen price, and at that time, that's a whole lot of money, but you were getting a lot of guitar for it, and a few things that this guitar simply does not have stock. For beginning, you have a nitro finish on an ash body. You had all USA components here from Fender. You had a USA bridge, and you had the die-cast USA tuners as well. So really, nothing. If we had one of those guitars, I doubt we would be thinking about replacing or modifying anything, because I have a 1982 JV Strat. Perfect. Didn't need a damn thing installed onto it, but I digress. Compare that with this guitar, which is the lower end version of it. This guitar has a basswood body. It does have a poly finish on it, and you have import electronics. You have Goto tuners on it, and just a typical unbranded bridge. Now, this version of the reissues were made from 1987 on and off again until around 1995. After that, you will find pink Paisley and blue flower Stratocasters out there. However, there's going to be a few key differences between them. The most obvious is going to be at the headstock. You're ditching the bullet truss rod. You're ditching the black CBS logo and the big headstock. Unfortunately, you're going back to the spaghetti logo and the smaller headstock. However, sometimes there can be a little bit of confusion when people are shopping for these guitars used, and I believe it's truly an honest mistake on behalf of the either individual seller or the shop that might not be really familiar with Fender Japan when it comes to calling one of the newer versions a 1993 or a 1994, for example. And I'm going to tell you why and break it down for you. On a 1993 or 1994 version, the original version of the reissue here with the big headstock, that would have a P serial number under a Made in Japan logo. You take that P serial and you change the Made in Japan to Crafted in Japan, you have 1999 till 2002, I believe. So Sometimes you'll see ones that have the newer appointments on it labeled as older guitars. That's not the case. But overall, I know that these guitars do have a real love or hate with some people. I've heard many stories, and even the example of James Burton I alluded to earlier in this video. Some people sat and played with these and they loved the way they felt, just like I love the way that this guitar feels, but they weren't as excited about the pink kind of flowery finish that's going on here. Me, I personally don't care. If a guitar plays great, it could have whatever kind of paint job on it. But it's a little bit of a controversial thing and really hit or miss with people, and I totally understand that. Wrapping things up as far as the generic specs go, you are going to have maple fingerboards on the vast majority, minus a few reissues that were made in the 2010s that did come with rosewood fingerboards, as well as, I believe it was 2018 or 2019, Fender Japan released Jaguars and Jazzmasters that had Paisley finishes and a rosewood fingerboard to boot, but also 7¼ inch radius. Alright, but enough of the general information. Now we're going to take a look at this guitar up close and see what kind of shape it's really in. Alright, this guitar is clearly going to need a little bit of tender love and care, perhaps some deoxit, some WD-40, some Big Ben's nut sauce, and, you know, some extra parts we're going to tinker around with, because that's the whole fun of doing this Paisley project. However, a few things that I would like to share about my impressions of having this guitar now for a little bit and playing it quite a fair amount. The neck really is incredible on this guitar. when you're talking about replacing parts, you're talking about modifying guitars, that's all fine and well. If you're starting from a place where the neck does not feel amazing to you in your hands, you are fighting an uphill battle. This one is absolutely aces, so I don't mind doing all these other little things that we're gonna address going forward with this little mini series. Outside of that, one small observation that I find very interesting to me. My personal preference, like many other Strat players, tune down to half a step, E flat. This guitar in E standard, I actually like it. I've never played a Strat that I liked playing in E standard, but for whatever reason, this one feels just right. It feels really good with it. Sure, maybe we'll mess around with it for the sake of doing it. We'll tune it down a half step, but as is, I gotta say, that was something that kind of threw me off a little bit. And yeah, the electronics, the neck pickup, I think sounds pretty good, but it's hard to make a Stratocaster's neck pickup, as long as it's not malfunctioning, sound bad in my opinion. So long as you're using a decent amp and you're an okay player, it's gonna sound pretty good. Bridge, really, really weak. Really, really thin. I know that Stratocaster bridge pickups in general are not known for being these gigantic, huge sounding pickups, and it's often why the HSS layout is shown up, because people want to have a humbucker in the bridge position to compensate for that kind of deficiency or weakness of the Stratocaster. I think the set of Lindy Fralins are going to do a lot with that, and I'll explain why and why we chose the specific set that we did when we get to that in the pickup video. But the guitar holds tune relatively well. The action on this guitar is set up very, very, very playable. And when I say that, it's not just the fact that the strings are pretty low and it's very comfortable to play. It's the fact that this has a 7¼ inch radius, but I'm not fretting out. No neck shim either. Gotta say, fantastic. I'm almost afraid to replace the bridge because of how well this guitar is already playing. So we'll cross that bridge in probably the third installment of this series, but man, very impressed. And it just goes to show you can have a 7¼ inch vintage spec radius on a guitar and play lead without it choking out at a reasonable action. At least, to me at least, a reasonable. And that's going to conclude episode 1 of Project Paisley. Now I need you to leave a comment. Let me know what you think about this guitar. Let me know what you think about this series and what you would like to see with it going forward. Any suggestions are always welcome. Hit the like button, please. Seriously, hit the subscribe button even more. I would really appreciate that. You have to say these things. I'm a YouTube person these days. But I really do. Thank you for watching. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And don't forget to play your guitar. Take it easy, everybody.